I was minding my own business, going through the season rewards, and yes, I managed to get a keycard. It was, of course, for getting to rank 70, getting that classified keycard, and we managed to actually pick up this somua SM out of it, of course, being very, very lucky. The classified keycards only have a few tier 8s as part of their luck reroll, and yeah, we definitely got lucky to be able to get this, and it is a very expensive premium if you do actually want to pick it up. There is the Nomad, or the somua SM, as the unskinned version of the Nomad, and yeah, we're going to be having a look at whether or not this tank is actually very good within the game. I've heard a lot of very nice things about it being a better AMX 5100, of course the tech tree counterpart in the French line, which leads on to the AMX 50B. This tank right here is basically a heavily armoured version of this tank apparently, so we're going to get into it, see what the statistics of the vehicle are and how it compares with other heavies in the game from some live gameplay later on in the video. Now, first things first, what do we notice with the tank? Well, it goes 37 kilometers an hour top speed forward. You've got 20 kilometers an hour top speed reverse, which isn't too immobile. It's a fairly mobile heavy tank, not the fastest, but it certainly won't be dragging behind like something like an E100 or a Mouse. You know, it's got a little bit of mobility anyway. You've also got fairly decent accuracy for a heavy tank. This is the base version of the tank. 0.36 accuracy is very, very nice. 2.3 second aim time, 10 degrees of gun depression, 15 degrees of elevation being pretty disappointing. But the 10 degrees of gun depression is absolutely fantastic. You've also got a 2.25 second intraclip reload, meaning that after you fire the first shell, you have to wait 2.25 seconds to fire the second one, and then a further 2.25 until the third, all the way up to the fifth shell, which is of course why this tank has 1500 alpha damage total, which is something I really do enjoy about the fact that we have the somua SM, is the 1500 alpha damage at tier 8 if you manage to pen every single round, and that is of course if you manage to pen every single round in the somua, which is very unlikely depending on how many tanks you can actually come up against, and also whether or not they actually stay still, if you can perma-track them in one singular place after they burn their repair kit with the first shell into their track, and hopefully you can pen that. But other than that, I think we've covered basically what the tank is necessarily about. It's basically like a fairly well armoured tank. It's, you know, it's got an alright bouncy turret. It's probably the area of the tank that is going to be more bouncy than anywhere else. You can get penned fairly reliably if someone knows to hit you, and that is kind of that upper bit of the turret. You can see 120 millimeters, which is, yes, very well angled, but you know, when you've got 120 millimeters, sometimes, especially if they get above you, they can pen you very reliably. You've also got those cheeks that you can see here, just either side of the mantlet of the tank, which can be penned. And if people have premium rounds, they can pretty much go through anywhere on your turret and pen very, very reliably. As you can see, the sides of the turret are 60 millimeters thick, and if they manage to get a flush shot into that, can be very, very painful for you. Of course, the hull armour of the tank is actually pretty okay. Yes, the lower plate is a little bit of a weak point with only something like 100 or 90 millimeters of armour, and also the side armour is okay. The upper plate armour is going to be fairly strong, 140 millimeters thick. It also has a nice angle to it, meaning that, yeah, it's going to be much harder for people to automatically pen you if they auto aim you, which is something I always like. I like a tank that doesn't necessarily get auto penned by people that, you know, aren't thinking very much and just auto aiming, because should you get rewarded for auto aiming? No, I don't think so, but there we go. Anyway, that is the tank and the basic rundown of it. Of course, we'll be talking more about how it plays within the game, and if you want to pick it up in a future bundle at some point, or if you just want to purchase the tank because you like the look of it, we're going to give that rundown on whether I think spending your gold on it is actually worth your time and money, of course. Now we have managed to get onto Highway, one of my more favoured maps within World of Tanks console, and I guess that means that we can hopefully have a good game. Of course, it is completely dependent. We are playing live, so we have no idea whether or not we're going to have a good game or not. But I guess that will show you once again, like always, whether the tank is as competitive as some of these videos make out on YouTube, because obviously most people don't want to put up replays of them failing their way in some of the tanks. But I guess that is what I'm here for. I can have very good games in tanks, and I can showcase just the pure 6k damage games in the tier 8 fairly regularly on the channel. But I think giving a holistic overview of the tanks to show whether or not that they are as good as a lot of people are making out really does showcase why some of the tanks are good and why they're bad, and potentially whether or not, yes, they might be pretty broken in some cases, but they might actually realistically be a little bit worse than what people make out. And I want to try and make sure that you are picking up tanks that you know all about them and whether they are actually good within the game, and not just because I've had one fantastic game with them. Obviously, it is kind of down to whether or not you really enjoy the tank playstyle a lot of the time, as to whether you think it's going to be worth it. I think that it does rely on your playstyle, because if you don't enjoy a certain playstyle, then you're probably not going to enjoy the way it actually plays in the game. And so, yeah, I think that is something that you'll have to think about, and that is where I think that this tank really does come in. It's got something for everyone. It has the mobility to move around the map. It's also got a fairly nice package of its gun. 1500 alpha damage. That's not something you get very regularly on a tier 8 tank, and that is why I think I'm going to love this tank so much. It's not necessarily because it's going to be super overpowered, because you do have a 37-second reload. As you're seeing right now, we've been pretty much useless for that time. What can we do? We can basically take a few shots for our team. We can't really do too much, but when you do get to fully reload, you can see what happens to this tiger right here. Unfortunately, didn't manage to get all of our shots off into him, but if we did manage to track him, that would be a lot of his hit points gone, because that's how the tank works. If you can lock down tanks, which is exactly how this tank is going to want to be played, then that is where you're going to be dealing the most damage. That's where this tank really fits in, and that's probably where you'll want to be taking it. And you can see just here, we've caught the side of this tank right here. He's bounced off of us. Our teammate then goes in front of us, which is really annoying, but yeah, I guess he couldn't really help it. He was obviously on the move anyway. He's getting a shift on. Now we are a big box of hit points though, with a 30-second reload, and we don't want to be getting hit by any artillery pieces, because yes, this tank is huge. It's a massive hitbox for artillery to be looking at you, and that is exactly what they will do if they do catch any of you, basically. But other than that, in this game, we are going to push forward and try and get forward a little bit, because if you are too far behind, not only will you have 37 seconds of being able to do nothing, you'll also have 37 seconds, or well, more than 37 seconds even, of trying to get to the place, because you don't have that necessary high mobility that a lot of tanks do have in the game now. I know that mobility plays a massive role in just trying to get forward and push out damage, and it is probably one of the most vital statistics within the game. I'm not saying it's the most vital, and a slow tank is going to be useless, but it definitely does make a difference, and hopefully with this game we're going to be able to be the difference in whether or not. And there you go, there's the artillery for you, putting out a lovely round into our back, and we've just lost every single bit of hit points that we did have, and it's probably looking like it's going to be curtains for us. We're going to try and put one into the Barracuda, because we are reloading now. And that is probably going to be curtains for us. He's reloaded, obviously. He's going to be coming. Hopefully our team can at least do something before he manages to come for us. Obviously, if we can get a little bit of an angle going, if we can put our gun into his, maybe he'll bounce, maybe he won't, I don't know, but it's going to be a little bit risky. Come on, teammates, please. But yeah, this is where the tank gets a little bit dodgy, and as we talked about, you do have that very long reload that becomes a real problem. But luckily, our teammate did manage to pick up the final damaging hit on him. We're now going to try and get RE safe to avoid getting taken out of the game. Obviously, that was very, very lucky. And unlucky at the same time. Obviously, artillery can ruin your game sometimes, and Sometimes, you can play arty safe, but sometimes it's not necessarily worth it, and you do need to move sometimes. And I think that is where this tank becomes a little bit tedious, because you're not necessarily the fastest tank. You don't necessarily have much artillery protection, which makes it very, very niche in some regards, with regards to pushing forward and getting the damage out quickly. Now, what we're going to have to do here is hope that the M41 Walker Bulldog does not somehow manage to get around us. I know he's going to probably be over here, or maybe make a swing round to try and come from behind us. We've got an Iron Rain in front of us, who is on, of course, a one-shot, which means that it's not as bad. But if we do manage to get hit by him, that will be game over. Luckily, we don't manage to. We catch him by surprise, and now it's time to move up towards our last remaining teammate on this side. Of course, get artillery safe, which is something that you're going to want to do in the Nomad. But now we still have 1,200 hit points worth of damage that we can do to our opponents. We do have now the Bulldog, who's pushed up, who's now going to be coming from behind us. Potentially, don't know where he's going to be coming from, but we do have to be a little bit careful as to the direction of this Bulldog. Yes, he will be coming probably from the other direction now. He's kind of being very, very careful, because I think he's just trying to spot for the enemy artillery, which isn't the worst idea, but now he's been set on fire and he's probably going to get taken out now, which means that we can push up towards him. He'll very rarely be able to actually outdo us, which means we can somehow bounce off the back of him, which is always really, really fun. And now we can push towards the artillery. It's very, very careful. Artillery puts one in, we kind of stop. Very lucky that we didn't manage to get hit there. Now we're going to make a weird move over to the left, because they probably won't expect it as often. With artillery, you never know, they could somehow loop a shell into you blind if they don't have 0 brain cells within the game. But there we go, SU-14-1, we're going to fully aim, I'm going to put one into him, our teammate finishes him off, and then the other artillery is probably going to get taken out in just a second to end the game. We have, of course, won, and we've managed to pick up 3,500 damage, which is always a good sight to see within the game. Not necessarily the highest amount of damage game that you'll probably ever see in the Nomad or the somua SM, but it will showcase, what kind of things you can expect with the tank. You're not necessarily going to bounce that many rounds, but you can bounce a few, and of course we lost the majority of our hit points to artillery, so we can't really complain too much about, the armor profile of the tank within this game, because artillery can take pretty much all of your hit points regardless of what tank you're in, as long as they hit you. So there we go, 3,596 damage, 958 assistance, meaning that we had a grand total of 4,400 combined damage, which isn't bad. We also earned 123,000 silver, and that was with absolutely no additional silver earn up. So yes, it will earn you some silver as well, as being a very, very fun tank to play, and we'll move into the second gameplay in just a second. Now, the second game, we have got pretty lucky and got Prokhorovka. Yeah, lucky in quotation marks. Of course, this being the bane of everyone's existence when playing a heavy tank, especially when there are 2 enemy artillery on the enemy team, and when you are such a gigantic slab of hit points for the enemy team to remove very kindly. So yeah, 1450 hit points disappears very, very quickly when the Lorraine 15550 decides to pen you, and obviously if the SU-14-1 decides that they're going to hit you and pen you, which, trust me, will probably most likely happen if they do manage to hit you direct, yeah, it can be very, very painful for you. So you have to be very, very careful where you actually place yourself within the game to avoid getting hit and to avoid losing all of those hit points. So especially so on these open maps where you have pretty much no cover. Now, what you see me doing here is taking a pretty aggressive place, to be honest with you, in a game where you probably wouldn't expect a heavy tank to be going on the medium hill. But considering that this tank is not necessarily your average medium tank, it's a heavy, of course. Meaning that, yeah, people don't expect you to be coming up into positions like this, and so that's why when you do put yourself into this position, you can surprise your opponents. We did see the wiggle of the screen as the artillery obviously missed somewhere close to us. Don't know exactly where, but he's going in this direction, meaning that we do need to be careful now, since he's fired his little warning shot, and often artillery's warning shots do get followed up by a nasty little my point exactly. The Ziska there being absolutely removed from the game and taken out by that horrible Su-14-1, which can be, definitely your bane of existence in your lightly armoured tanks, especially your boxy lightly armoured tanks, which, we are in, unfortunately. So, KV-4 is, of course, over there. We can try and put rounds into him, but we do have to be careful from the right-hand side where often the enemy tanks are going to be. We're now going to angle our tank towards where the artillery are going to be. We're also going to put ourselves on the little bit of the slope, if possible, to avoid getting hit. But what we do need to do now is, of course, protect the left-hand side of the map, where a lot of these enemy tanks are pushing up from. Problem being is that if they manage to then push up into some more forward positions, it can be very, very difficult to budge them out, and often then you'll get sausage sandwiched, especially if you haven't won the hill. Luckily in this game, being that we have won that hill, we can be in a bit more of a, in a better position really. And we can see, as you're seeing now, we're picking up tons and tons of assistance damage. We're on 1200 in a heavy tank, and that is something that the Nomad does offer within the game. It's not going to be that reliable in terms of being able to kick up that much assistance damage super reliably, but it more so than a lot of the other heavy tanks that you'll see. We are playing a little bit risky here, which we could take a hit. Yep, a round did come in, but we did get lucky to avoid that one. But now what we can do is just push towards the enemy tanks, and this KV-4 for some reason is just keeping on going. Don't quite know why, but we're going to have absolutely no complaints as we slide rounds into the side of his tank, which is, of course, where you want the enemy tanks to be if you are going to be hitting them. Now, we do have to be careful. There are 2 enemy tank destroyers on the enemy team, which that can be very, very painful, especially when they are such tanks that they are, being the Su-130 PM and the T-25/2 not so much, but obviously, point still stands. 500 and something damage can be taken off of our hit points very, very easily, and that's going to mean that we are then a 2-shot for that tank later on. So you have to be careful in those sort of positions. But we're going to throw caution to the wind. We're going to go off in. We're going to hope that we can spot some of the opponents to bring up the damage within this game further. We're going to hope that we can get some more assistance damage within this game, and if we can do that, then it's going to make it so much more rewarding if we can. So there we go. That's my kind of mentality. Obviously, artillery can have an absolute field day on us if they do decide to. Obviously, don't piss me off. We're going to put 1 round into him, then we're going to try and hit that T-32, which we do manage to do, but we only manage to hit him in a pretty awful position anyway. IS being sat with his arse to us, meaning that we can put rounds into the back of him, and of course we are going to win this game very, very easily. There's 13-2. I very much doubt that the artillery on his own, being the Lorraine 155-50, could take us out. If it had been a T-92, potentially. But there we go, managing to pick up once again another 4,000 combined damage game in a pretty easy fashion. You know, we didn't have to think too much within that game, to be honest with you. Pretty much just sat there, tried to avoid getting hit by artillery, and then managing to pick up damage very easily. You know, not too hard. Of course, you do need to sometimes fire those premium rounds, and you saw us firing them at those heavy tanks to ensure that we aren't bouncing any and maximising the DPM. You have to think about that sometimes because, yes, although you could save yourself some credits, if you don't manage to do any damage within the game, you're going to be earning a hell of a lot less credits, and especially when the game is coming to a close, you really do need to push that damage out pretty quickly. But there you go, the somua SM. That's kind of the playstyle you can expect. It is not necessarily the fastest heavy, it's not necessarily the most overpowered tier 8 heavy tank, but it is definitely a competitive tank, and it will be very, very fun, especially if you like dealing 1500 damage to opponents in tier 8 tanks. So there we go. Obviously, if you're coming up against tier 6s, this must be a very painful one to come up against, having pretty much 2 times the alpha damage that your tank will probably have, at tier 6. So there we go. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you want to check out more very much like this, then do so in the on screen right now. And obviously if you want to check out some other ones, we have a gameplay playlist on the channel along with all of the update news. And if you want to check that out, of course, just go to the relevant playlist on the channel. And if you aren't already, please subscribe, as it does help out the channel massively. I don't tend to ask too much, but it will help us get towards my 10k goal. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Obviously 7,500 of you have joined, which is unbelievable, really. Yeah, just thank you so much. It's been a crazy year, and I look forward to a few more years at least, hopefully, on playing this game and showing you what kind of tanks are like and whether they're good or not. Hopefully I can endure the mental barrage of playing World of Tanks. But other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope you'll join me back on one of those videos. Goodbye.